Hi, Zizaran here with another Delirium starter guide, this time featuring Blade Vortex and hopefully Blade Blast. Blade Blast is a new skill that interacts with all of the Blade skills, and it's a new skill, so we don't really know how strong it is. It could be crazy, but the bottom line here is that Blade Vortex is an insane skill, completely independent of Blade Blast. So even if Blade Blast turns out to be shit, this is a strong build. If it turns out to be crazy good, then this is going to be an insane build. So it's a really, really good starter build because it doesn't require any items and feels extremely strong as a first character. It's also a build that has very high single target and good clear speed. If you haven't seen one of my build guides before, I have like an introduction coming up next of how Path of Building works. We use it quite a lot more than what most people who make build guides do, so make sure you watch that if you haven't seen it before. If not, if you've seen it, you can skip this part. So this is Path of Building, and we use it in a special way, like way more than most streamers do. So first, there's like download instructions for Path of Building and the description. I'm using a separate branch as well, and we'll have instructions on how to do that. It's a lot more up to date and also has some extra special things like it lets Path of Building do actual impale calculations, and you get to have Pantheon. So if you're wondering why mine looks different than the default Path of Building, that is why. It's definitely worth getting POB. Generally, we use it. It's a large part of how we do the guides. And first I want to show like how to import a build. So first, to import a build, you would click here, import from paste bin. All of my guides would have a paste bin, and then you would click on the import, and then you would get the guide. If you're ever just wanting to explore a streamer's build or something like that, you can just type in any streamer's profile name and then click start, and then you have to like select through the character that they're playing on, and then you can look at everything like that. Obviously that won't be a guide, but that's how you do that. This is a video we're going to reuse for every video guide, so the POB and stuff that we'll be showing in the background won't be the one that you're watching most likely. This is more an explanation of how we do our guides, so you know what to look for and how to follow it. So something that makes our guide stand out a lot is instead of just having a finished skill tree and saying, hey, here you go, there's the skill tree, we do this step by step. And the reason for that is to make it a lot more obvious for new players where to go next and like what are the most efficient nodes in the start. Because if all you got was this, new players would know where to go here, here, or here first. So we also include like ascendancies. If you see here, when you click on normal lab, you can see that the first one in the guide that we're using as an example would be arena challenger. When you then click on the cruel lab one, it would show blood in the eyes, and it's like this on every guide we do. And this is a good example too, because the example here is a gladiator bleed build, and there's a couple of different versions that we talk about in that guide. So like there's one where you focus on cluster jewels. There's one with when you switch to the bleed part, and there's another like block version for tankier. In the skills section, we usually try to make it very, very obvious, like what's for leveling and what you're actually using endgame, and like what your AoE and what your single target is. So here are some examples. You know, you have double strike early on for single target, and then you have frost blades for clearing, and then later you switch to blade storm as your ability, and then generally gems will be linked in order of importance as well. So if you only have, for example, in this case, a 4 link, you would use Impale, Rage, and Close Combat. The notes section. So this is made by Mr. Madiki, and it's like an extra thing we do for new players. Like it looks like a big wall of text, but what this does is that it shows players where each gem is and where you can buy it and where it can be found. And for example, if it's a gem that you normally don't get as that class, we'll try to specify that as well. There'll also be some extra notes, like, you know, what to ascend, what the Pantheons are, what the Bandits are. So some extra info there, so you don't have to like ask around a lot. In the item one, there's usually things like early game, mid game, and then like, you know, I am rich and I have the money to invest in this build. So there's different gear sets as well. And pretty much all the beginner guides are really aimed at being on a super budget. I never try to flash like crazy numbers like 20 million DPS, 30 million DPS. The important part about my guides is that a new player who doesn't know much about Path of Exile can achieve this, and we try to help you get that as much as possible. So as you can see here, as normal, we do the step-by-step skill tree, and here you can see that your first normal lab is you go Trickster and Swift Killer. And then you have Cruel Lab and Merc Lab, etc. And step by step, just like normal. So we also have like a special one here with in case cluster jewels end up being really good. And there's several new ones that look great. Depends on what you find, obviously. And then you sort of custom make that. It's a bit hard to put cluster jewels into a guide right now. We also have a crit version for endgame when you end up getting a bit better gear. And that should be way more damage. So for leveling, early on here, you have Freeze Pulse to level 12 and Frost Bomb. Then once you get that in Cavern of Wrath, you can switch to Blade Vortex, and you can use that for the entire leveling process. Feels great for taking on all the early act bosses, and once you get to level 38 and you get Unleash, the game changes a little bit, because this is a huge quality of life for Blade Vortex. If you've never used Unleash on a skill before, the way it works is that it'll add a counter next to your spell, and what it does is if it says 3, then you will cast 4 Blade Vortexes. So now you no longer need to like right click and hold it down and cast several blades. You can right click, you get 4, and then you can run for a little bit while it's regenerating its charges and then cast it again. So it ends up with you casting a lot less and getting a lot more for it. Once you get around Act 6, putting a Ice Bite and a Innervate on your Herald of Ice can feel very good as well. It gives you Frenzy charges and stuff. Now, obviously, Blade Vortex is pretty much a melee skill, more melee than actual melee skills as well. So survival, because of that, can be a little bit sketchy while leveling if you've never played a skill like this before. So something that helps a lot with that is getting an early Val Molten Shell. Once you have Val Molten Shell and a Granite Flask, you're pretty much immortal to all the act bosses while leveling. It'll last something like 6 to 8 seconds, I think, for the Val Molten Shell while leveling. And by then, most bosses should be dead because you do have a lot of damage on this build. You do also, on this build, want a Jade Flask really early on because you're a Trickster, and a large part of your survival is going to be a Jade Flask because of the Ghost Shroud and how that works. Every time you get hit, you recover a large amount of energy shield based on your evasion. For Blade Blast itself and how to use it, from what I can tell, you have to hover your mouse over your character and click the Blade Blast thing. I can see it being used mostly as something used for single target or for like more tanky rares as you're running by them. And from what we've seen in the videos, it sort of like detonates, and based on your AoE, it'll like AoE further. Definitely worth playing around with. It might end up being something used for clearing as well, but it's obviously too early to tell. And you can see here we have all like the gem setups that you should need. In items, we have one set for like early game gear, and like there's not much that's changed. It's basically going to be slap on crit gear on your rares. When you're crit, you don't really need a Primstore as well, because there's not as much pressure to convert everything to elemental. The reason why you want to do that when you're non-crit is because we're using Elemental Overload for a massive damage boost. Whereas on crit, it doesn't so much matter because you're not really scaling elemental damage anymore. You're more spell damage and actual crit multiplier. So as you can see here in the crit version, don't really need that. And here you want to start getting crit multiplier on as many places as you can and crit chance. And you also have to use a diamond flask here. Aziri's Promise, really good for pure damage. Obviously, like it can be a bit hard to give up a granite or a jade flask from this build because survival is key. But an Aziri's Promise is crazy on a Blade Vortex build because you have so much physical and elemental damage. So you get a lot more extra chaos out of it. Other than that, pretty simple for the most part. It's just rings and amulets. Everything just does like life and resists on it. We don't really add resist to the POB version because the bottom line is just make sure that your character is resist capped. Generally around Act 4 or 5 you want to be very high, close to 75. One of the best ways to scale the damage on your build is gem levels like with any spell, but also physical damage as extra is really strong. Also remember, getting a Searching Eye Jewel with Onslaught on kill is really good, especially if you can get it early. That's a great way to not have to worry about getting Onslaught as a support gem or as a flask. Other than the Brimstone and Aziri's Promise, there's a couple of other uniques that you could look out for as well. Seal's Amplifier helps a lot with your AoE and gives you like a little bit extra clear speed early on. Esh's Mirror, especially if you're crit, is really great because you're going to end up getting a lot of extra lightning damage. I wouldn't use this on a non-crit version. On's Heritage, if you want to be extra tanky, is always nice, even though do remember that this did get a nerf in 3.10 Delirium, so it only has +2 max res now. Taste of Fate, always nice for Blade Vortex. It gives you more tank because you probably don't have a lot of physical damage mitigation, and you get more physical damage as the extra cold damage. And Impulsa is always interesting to use. I would probably prefer an Impulsa on the non-crit version than the crit, because the Impulsa explosion is going to get scaled by the Elemental Overload. This is also a great build to get the item level 85 Crusader chest explosion on. Now, flasks are always really important and something a lot of people following guides don't always care enough about. So make sure that you have bleed immunity, freeze immunity, curse immunity, and finally shock immunity. And that's the order and priority that you should care about it too. For example, if you don't have bleed immunity, you're randomly going to die in maps. And the most important thing for any Trickster build is a Jade Flask. And this is because of the Ghost Dance Ascendancy. And the final ascendancies as well, and you can see when to take them in the skill tree there. But Harness the Void, so much damage. Swift Killer gives us frenzy charges and very easy to sustain that. That also means that it takes a lot of the pressure off always needing Ice Bite on your Herald of Ice. Obviously it still makes it shatter more. Ghost Dance is like the Trickster's main case of survival, and it makes you grants you a lot of energy shield whenever you're hit. And then we have Escape Artist for when you do have, for example, a Sadist Carb. It's going to give you not just a lot of evasion, but a lot of energy shield as well. So that makes this a great build for going a very hybrid kind of thing. And if you really do want to invest into hybrid, you can take Melding instead of some of the other life nodes. And what I really love to do on builds like this is, first off, finding a Soul Tether is very nice. The way it works, and at this point we're going to start needing some actual leech. So a couple of ways to get that. You could get some energy shield leech from the from nodes similar to Light Eater, or from this one here, which has energy shield leech. And that would be enough as well. And the way Soul Tether works is you start the map with 0 energy shield, and then you have to leech it back, and it starts giving you life as extra energy shield. And something else that's extra great then is the Gravicious Unveil Craft for chest is life as extra energy shield. This is giving us even more. And then obviously Trickster is already getting loads of energy shield. So if you have 6 or 7k life, you might already be looking at somewhere in the vicinity of 2 to 5k energy shield, depending on how good your gear is. And then there's another thing we can do. There's the Timeless Jewel of Doriani, and this adds loads of extra life as energy shield as well. And then you're starting to look at a really nice balance of hybrid. And that's not even the best part. So Soul Tether's main strength, when you're sort of leeching it back, is that you're never full energy shield. And because of that, the way leech works on life is that you hit 100% life and then the leech stops. Then you need to take damage again in order to continue leeching. However, since you're never really considered full, you're always leeching. And what this does with Soul Tether is we basically get life leech effects are not removed at full life because you're never full life. So you're sort of always leeching, and this is really strong because then when you take an incoming hit, you can see it instantly going back up. So that is a good way for this build to get a lot of survival, and then you can just continue investing into damage. You do have the option as well to go Assassin late game if you especially if you play softcore and you don't really care that much about your defense and you just want to go crazy damage. That is definitely an option. So the Pantheons for this build, I would do Brian King and Ralakesh while leveling. Brian King is for stun immunity and Ralakesh is to avoid taking as much damage from lab traps. Late game, I usually suggest Solaris and Shakari. Upgrading these is very strong, particularly Shakari that gives you poison immunity. Anointments for this build is very similar to what I recommend quite a lot, which is Diamond Skin early on. Diamond Skin is so cheap and just gives you a lot of gear room early on. Prodigal Perfection is most likely what I would go for next, but that costs a bit more. Still a very cheap anointment. And then as an expensive anointment that I would save up for when I have a really good amulet would be Thunderous Salvo, which is +1 max number of seals for your Unleash. Or with Blade Vortex, I end up having a lot of extra room to fit things like Vaal Extra Fire or Decoy Totem and stuff like that. Blade Blast is obviously adding a new gem link, so you will have less room than normal. But like I said, we don't really fully know how good Blade Blast is, so this is going to be some trial and error. It's going to be interesting to see how this works and if it's really strong or not. So normally the way I would solve mana issues on this build would be Leech on Boots. However, that's been removed from the game quite a while now, so now you're actually going to have to use Mana Fast for quite a while. Once you have Unleashed, that fixes a lot of your mana issues, and I would also recommend trying to take Soul Siphon while leveling. It basically gives you mana on kill, and because Unleash you cast so many times instead of one, that saves you a lot of mana issues. And that's like the main things that you would do on a non-crit build. Crit, however, has very few issues with mana, and this is because you usually have Curse and Hit Assassin's Mark on Herald of Ice, which you could use on a non-crit build as well, it just doesn't give you as much of a benefit. On a crit build, you're basically, anytime you kill something, you're pretty much full mana. But hopefully just using Soul Siphon as well as the Unleash, saving you a lot of mana should be fine for the most part. So for leveling uniques, it's like your standard things like Tabitha, Gold Rim, etc. Something that helps a lot while leveling is +1 all physical spell level ones. So the main like quality of life defense you get on this build is you obviously have Fortify from your shield charge, and then you have the Trickster Ghost Rat, which regenerates a large amount of your energy shield every time you get hit, as well as a lot of evasion. And the Trickster defense really skyrockets a lot from a Jade Flask. We have Vaal Molten Shell as well. You really do want a Granite Fitted to use this, and when you eventually have to leave your Granite, then Vaal Molten Shell loses a lot of its potency. Trickster has amazing sustain, and that's mainly from Ghost Rat. And the way it works is that every time you get hit, you regenerate energy shield based on your evasion, and that's why we want the Jade Flask, as well as the majority of our gear will be evasion based. But for additional sustain, especially when we're converting our Blade Vortex to elemental damage, there's new cluster jewels that have elemental damage leached as life, and this like gives us a great opportunity to get some additional leech here. So generally we use Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder. Because you scale your Herald of Ice, you don't always have that much space, but you should be able to fit a Skitter bot. If you're feeling that you're running out of mana too much, this would be the first thing you would drop. There's no like special build enabling mechanics for this build. So the biggest drawback for this build is definitely that you're more melee than actual melee builds. You have to stand next to the enemy, and because of this, something like a Decoy Totem is definitely worth picking up. You can also do the double totem support on Decoy Totem if you have enough sockets. Then the bosses and stuff are mostly going to focus on your Decoy Totem, and then you can stand behind them and just throw your Blade Vortex repeatedly. So this is a very cheap build, and there's nothing that you're going to have to worry about splashing out on, especially early. Later on, you could end up investing into a Timeless Jewel of Doriani, like I said, to get like really high hybrid defenses. And a Soul Tether is most likely going to end up being pretty expensive as well, but that's not something you have to worry about super early. So this is a really fun to play build. It's really nice to like watch your blades just go around crushing everything, and you get to use Vaal Blade Vortex as well. You want to get that as early as possible. Helps a lot for single target damage. You just like whack it down whenever you get to a boss, and it'll start spinning. If it's anything like my luck, if there's any other monster nearby, your Vaal Blade Vortex is going to leave the target that you want to kill and fuck off to the 1 HP monster that you forgot to clear. But definitely worth using Vaal Blade Vortex nonetheless. It's extremely strong. Obviously, this isn't like the best boss killer in the world, because your defenses aren't exactly crazy sustain over longer fights. It should be able to do like most of the Conquerors and do really well, especially on softcore. And something that's really nice about this is you do have like a lot of other cool options you can transition into. You could go a crit assassin Blade Vortex later. You could also very easily switch into like a sort of Herald Bomber where you use Heralds instead of normal attacks to attack. And you could also switch into like Trickster Essence Drain, which is another very strong skill as well. So I hope you guys enjoy this build. Good luck in Delirium. If you have any questions or there's something you can't quite figure out with the build guide, watch it again. But then after that, drop by my channel, twitch.tv/Zizaran. And thanks for watching. Try to die less than I do.